Bore da. We are live on Talking Wales. Thank you for everybody who are with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't know about you. I don't like the new version. Right, let me just get... So, we're building a community and we want you to be part of it. A news and information service designed to keep Welsh citizens informed, a space where issues that matter and impact our daily lives can be discussed, developing ideas and challenging those in power. Sharing news and information via digital radio, YouTube, social media and online. Using clear, understandable language. On the platforms you use most often. It'll be owned by you, our members, serving all of Wales and its people wherever they are in the world. Join us on our journey and help us create a better Wales. Right, I hope you can hear us. We had a bit of an echo going on there. So bore da and welcome to Talking Wales. We have two guests with us today, Leanne Wood. So Leanne is former leader of Plaid and is also a member of the Commission looking at reform of Wales in general. Bore da, Leanne, how are you?
Bore da, I'm very well, thank you, Hugh. Diolch yn fawr.
And we also have Ruth Watson, who is a journalist from Scotland, who will be giving us a perspective of how things are looking from a Welsh perspective, from Wales, and also what Scotland is seeing of Wales in the general election campaign from that perspective. So, yes, let's get started. So just double check now. So I'll just put it on here. There we are. So obviously this week we've had the debates. We had the leaders' debates with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak earlier in the week, and Friday night we had the multiple debate.
Hugh, if this isn't going out live, that's great because your voice is dropping in and out quite profoundly.
Right, I'm getting an echo for some reason. Just check on it.
Your mic's better now, actually.
Right, can you hear me better now? There we are. So, yeah, so the debates on Friday night, it was quite interesting. Leanne, if we come to you first, because obviously you have those feelings of...
You're going off mic again, Hugh.
Hang on. Can you hear me now? Is that better? There we are. It was a small technical issue. So, yes, at the beginning, so we had the leaders' debate on Friday, where we had... Oh. So, Leanne, your experience, because obviously you were actually you came to sort of national prominence with your discussion with Mr. Nigel Farage. What did you think of the discussion on Friday?
I think it's really important that these debates include a wide a range of, as possible, of voices. And the first debate that was between the leader of the Labour Party and the leader of the Conservative Party, I just found it a massive put-off, I have to say, because there's very little difference between them, really, in terms of policy, in terms of their messaging. You know, there's a competition to see who can be toughest on immigrants, or who can be the hardest in terms of when it comes to spending on defence. And so I found that quite off-putting. And of course, you know, when you just got two blokes shouting over the woman presenter, that's pretty hard to listen to as well. So the 7-way debate that took place was more refreshing, I think. I didn't actually watch that debate because I was out campaigning on the doorsteps and holding an election event. But from what I can see in terms of the coverage afterwards, it seems that there was a wider range of discussion. And back in 2015, when Plaid Cymru first had this platform of these UK-wide television debates, there was a 7-way debate then as well. And I think that one was the one that actually provided the greatest range of politics, the widest range of debating points. And I think it was probably the one that received the most viewers as well. Of course, since 2015, the leaders of the two largest parties in the UK get to decide which debates they take in part in and which debates they aren't. It's shoddy, I think, that the 7-way debate took place without the leaders of all the parties. It just means that people can't get a full view of exactly what the leader would do or wants to do in terms of their policy agenda. And I think the leaders should be there, and I think it should be compulsory. I don't think they should get to call the shots, because they get an added advantage when they do that. You're on mute.
Sorry, so Ruth, so from a Scottish perspective, how did it appear for you?
Well, I agree with what Leanne's said about the leaders, for Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak not to take part in leadership debates. I think, from my perspective, looking at it from Scotland, we view it, many of us view it, that actually they don't respect the fact that the SNP is the third largest party in Westminster. It's very much that they're only going to talk to each other because they don't think that everybody else is on a level playing field, or is at their level. That, I think that's kind of what they want, the impression they want to give. They're talking to a particular base. They actually aren't interested in the people of Scotland, or perhaps even the people of Wales. I think that they're playing to their domestic base, which is very much the English domestic base, as you could see by the question about the football teams at the end, although Rishi Sunak seems to think that Wales has made it through to the Euros too. But for me, I think that it just shows that they're feared, and many Scots see that. Many Scots think, oh, they don't want to debate with Stephen Flynn because he'll wipe the floor with them. They don't want to debate with John Swinney because he has got he's got a very broad appeal, and if they were to behave with John Swinney the way that they did with each other, I mean, I think that he would very gently wipe the floor with him. He's got a very avuncular kind of manner about him, and I think that them getting all het up in the midst of John's eternal calmness, I think that they would come off even worse. So in Scotland, there's a sort of two-pronged approach, which is, we don't believe that they will stand up for Scotland because, or many of us don't believe they'll stand up for Scotland because they didn't even mention Scotland once, and we think that they're actually just a wee bit feared of being challenged. And I think that came across as well in the 7-leader debate. I actually thought that Rhys Paworth did really well. He was the first to break from the pack in terms of interjecting in an appropriate way during the questioning. So he came across as somebody who was very much on the ball, and was very astute and was confident, but without being pushy or impolite. And I thought that he actually came across as a very impressive figure. He's not somebody I've really seen performing before. I think it is to English television's eternal shame that Nigel Farage gets an endless platform, although obviously this was appropriate because he's standing, or his party that he's the chief executive and owner of is standing. But I think that the disproportionate platforming of Nigel Farage, I think, is something which will be studied by journalism students in the decades to come if we do still have a free journalistic press, because I think if the likes of Nigel Farage gets his way, journalism is going to go down a very dark hole in the British Isles.
I understand, I haven't seen it because obviously setting up for Talking Wales, that Mr Farage was a guest of Laura Koonsberg this morning. So again, just looking at it, yes, they are in opinion polls polling relatively well, but the polls are what they are. They're opinion polls. When you look at their performance in the, in any sort of recent elections, the by-elections, the police commissioner elections, their performance wasn't that good. So yes, they should have a voice because obviously, there is support for them, but it does make people question, sort of the balance that they're getting. So Leanne, I saw you nodding there in agreement with Ruth. So what would your take on that be?
I think Nigel Farage has been completely manufactured and given a platform over many, many years that he shouldn't have had, really. He hasn't been an elected politician outside of the European Parliament, and I can't think of a single other MEP that's had that level of attention that he has had. I remember when I was leading Plaid Cymru, it was around 2017-18, I think. Somebody had calculated that I had appeared on Question Time 18 times throughout the time that I'd been leader. And I think the figure for Nigel Farage at that time was 36 times. And again, without any elected office. But of course, he makes good television, doesn't it? It's very entertaining. It pulls in the audience. It gets everybody wound up. And as we know from social media, the kinds of things that get people wound up are the kinds of things that attract viewers and works well for the algorithms. So I can see why it's happened. But I think it's actually quite dangerous. People should have platforms when they have something to represent, when they've got votes and elected members to represent. And I'm afraid that Nigel Farage has had way more opportunities to reach people than democratically elected party leaders who should have had, and if they'd had half the platform, if Rhun ap Iorwerth as leader of Plaid Cymru had had just 5% of the platform that Nigel Farage has had, then Wales would probably be very close to independence by now. But of course, for many people across the UK, they're seeing Rhun ap Iorwerth for the very first time in this leaders' debate. So there's something very unfair and I think actually anti-democratic going on with all of this.
I think it's quite interesting from a Welsh perspective as well, and be interesting to get your thoughts on this, Ruth, is, Wales is one of the few places where Reform, or in their previous incarnations, UKIP, and I don't know I can't remember what they became after UKIP. So they have had they've had representation in the Senedd, or the Assembly as it was then. They don't seem to have the same cut through in Scotland, and obviously you have proportional representation as well as Wales, and it looks, based on the general election in Wales in 2 years' time, it's likely they will have a presence again in the Senedd. So why do you think, why aren't they sort of breaking through in Scotland?
I think it's because we've had an SNP government which has delivered on maintaining the social contract. So the bigoted nonsense that you get about blaming migrants. There was a gentleman on the Seven Leader debate that asked, said, I live in Essex and I can't, the roads have got potholes. I can't see a doctor. My kids can't get into school. Is it because there's too many immigrants? And of course, in Scotland, we would say that the answer to that is because your local council is so underfunded; they're not providing the decent services, and the NHS has been so eviscerated by the Tories that that's why there's no doctors. Whereas in Scotland, because we've had an SNP government, then I mean, obviously there are many things that SNP has not delivered on, but the social contract has been maintained. If I need to see a doctor, I can phone up in the morning, and the doctor will triage me by phone. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had somebody the same day seen in that same afternoon. We still got our services, and they're still functioning, and we're still very grateful to them because they are still functioning. Even though we are being absolutely hammered by the austerity agenda. And so I think that people are being directed to say, to point to the other, to say, we don't have jobs because of immigrants. We don't, and all of this is being absolutely, I mean, it's the tactics of the 1930s. It's a nasty seam of politics, which has never gone away, and is still being played upon by some really nasty parts of society. And I think we almost got rid of it when there was that those moments of hope, when it looked like things might function again. I mean, dare I say it, sort of in 1997. I mean, I thought again somebody in the debate the other day summed it up very well. I actually think it was Renapa Yaworth who said that in 1997 there was hope at the prospect of a Labour government, and now there's just resignation because it's more of the same. And I said Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek Minister for Finance, he said that he thought the reason that Brexit had been rejected by the people of Scotland, I mean, across Scotland, we voted to remain in the EU. And he said he thought that the reason that the Brexit Party hadn't gained traction in Scotland is because we had maintained the social contract. So we see that we see immigration on the whole as something that's really good, because we welcome, we're an internationalist nation, and because things are working for our communities, we're not blaming the other. We're kind of celebrating it because we like New Scots.
So, Ruth, I think that's a perfect segue into a discussion on the next part of Talking Wales, looking at immigration, because obviously it's been one of the topics that's been under discussion this week. So I've just prepared a short video to give a little bit of context about the situation of immigration. So, immigration has been a central issue during the last week of campaigning. But what are the facts that lie behind the statistics? The UK has experienced broadly similar levels of migration compared to other high-income countries on average over the past few decades, with people coming to study or work and their dependents making up the vast majority of those who have come to the UK. 40% of those have come from India, Nigeria and China. The numbers coming on humanitarian grounds and to seek asylum have actually fallen in recent years, mainly due to the decreasing number of people coming from the Ukraine. Research shows that the impacts of migration on wages and employment prospects for UK-born workers are small. There is no single correct estimate of migrants' fiscal impact. Different studies make different assumptions, and not everyone will agree on what the best assumptions to make are. Immigration has been a central issue during the last week of campaigning. But what are the facts that lie behind the statistics? The UK has experienced broadly similar levels of migration compared to other high-income countries on average over the past few decades, with people coming to study or work and their dependents making up the vast majority of those who have come to the UK. 40% of those have come from India, Nigeria. Sorry, it was just repeating itself there. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we've had the debate, and it seems to be there's been a shift. We saw it in the the debate on Friday night, where it was Reform, Labour, and Conservatives all vying for the same space of the the numbers are a problem, that we've got to get the numbers down. But it's quite interesting. So, the research that, behind the video there was actually looking at from the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford, which is a widely respected organisation. And it's clear that if you actually look into the details, that, having, zero net migration, it's an impossibility. It's just not something that can be delivered because of the nature of how the economy works, with people coming here to study, and obviously people coming here to work. So, from that perspective, what do you think, Leanne, when you hear the discussions around immigration? What's your take on it as an issue during the general election?
I despair, to be honest, and I've been despairing about this issue for many, many years now, because it acts as a dog whistle policy issue for all the unsavoury aspects of our politics, right from the far right, right through to the centre-right, people who are in the Labour Party. They're vying over each other now, in competition with each other to be the toughest on immigration. And this is mainly an England debate. But because we have our media so intrinsically linked between England and Wales, and we don't have the independent media that they have in Scotland, this has become an England and Wales debate. And I wish that we could be more like Scotland in many, many ways. But on this question of the media, I think it's key. There's a different discussion happening in Scotland. Yes, it's related to the social contract, as Ruth has just pointed out, but it's also related to how the media reflects the discussion around the social contract and immigration, and the fact that politicians in Scotland seem more ready to be able to challenge some of those myths that are spun about immigration and put the facts. And I think that has resulted in a completely different discussion. The way things are going here in Wales are dreadful on this question. People are discussing it all too often without the facts and without the statistics and without the correct information. And they're just perpetuating the sound bites that they hear from the politicians that they're in competition with each other. We mentioned Nigel Farage earlier on. He's been a key in terms of perpetuating myths, using dog whistle politics to use people's anxieties in order to gain votes and money and all of those other problem ways in which that politician and the political party structure, it's a business, it's not even a political party, is all set up. It's damaging to our democracy, and it's spreading poison and toxicity right through the discussion. And as a result, we can't have the debates that we need to have. We can't talk about how we need to invest in our NHS and raise taxes, because migrants are being blamed for the problems in the NHS, even when it's the fact that you're more likely to be treated by somebody who's come from another country than to meet them in the queue. So we've had a completely skewed debate on this question for years and years and years. And I'm afraid it explains why parties like Reform are now polling so well, and why the other parties have to go onto that territory and try to compete with them.
And Ruth, so in Scotland, because I think, Leanne, I think you probably would agree that the situation in Wales has been slightly different, where the Labour Party in Wales has been more open on the issue of immigration and sort of being more welcoming, as making Wales country of asylum. So in Scotland, what's the situation there? Is it something that across the political spectrum, that the Labour and obviously the Conservatives, are they agreeing with the central parties in London, or are there any differences up in Scotland?
I think they're a wee bit schizophrenic, to be honest. I think that they find themselves saying one thing for a Scottish audience and another thing to appease their Westminster masters. I think that Stephen Flynn hit the nail on the head when he called out as being sort of the worst kind of bigot, and again I think it was Rhyn ap Iorwerth as well called him, Nigel Farage, bigoted, and Farage was always the best. Is that the best you can do? But it has to be called out, because it's not just dog whistle racism; it's overt racism, and in Scotland, we very much see ourselves. We've got this saying, "All Jock Tamson's bairns," and it means that everybody's welcome. It means that all are welcome. Now, yeah, Scotland does for sure have our problems with racism, because people are people, and racism is a universal blight. But when the Home Office police came for two people who were accused of being illegal migrants, there's been several instances where people in the community have gathered around the vans and stopped people from being taken and seized until they've had legal representation. And of course, nobody's saying that somebody who has got a legal process which should be carried out against them should be given carte blanche. What we're saying is that there should be dignity, and legal process should be allowed to take place without these ghastly, inhumane treatments that people are having. I think that in Scotland, I would love to think that we had an independent media, and it's interesting that that's your perspective of it, Leanne. I mean, I worked with the BBC for many years back when that was something I was proud of, and I'm actually one of the reasons I became so involved within the sort of the political spectrum of Scottish, sort of the Scottish social scene, is because I'm so alarmed by the editorial choices that are being made. Very, very often now, the balance, the absolutely scrupulous balance that used to be held, is not the case anymore. And there's very much the case that sort of England is held as the standard, as the norm. So I mean, if, for example, there's an issue with the appalling issue of sewage, raw sewage in the water in England, then if a big story like that comes up, rather than explaining that the situation in Scotland is different and actually significantly better, although we do still have our problems, there will be this issue of, Scottish water is terrible too. So it's just kind of, there's always this, just a wee bit rubbish that kind of keeps on coming out. Interestingly, that does not happen with the race and the Islamophobic issues. So there are areas where actually the Scottish dignity and universality does still come through. I think it is of serious concern the way in which the likes of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage have talked about Muslim women and Muslim people, and I think that it is of serious concern the way in which these, like, as you say, dog whistles come out. And it very much upsets me to see Keir Starmer really just refusing to rock the boat. Whereas in Scotland, it has been better. I mean, it definitely has been better. And for example, with the very clear support for the people of Palestine and the very clear calling out of the genocide that the Israelis are committing, that is a very big difference. And I think the people of Scotland on the whole are really disappointed by what's happening coming out of Westminster.
Yeah. And Leanne, obviously I can see you sort of nodding in agreement there, but I think, it's interesting. What would your take be? Because obviously the Labour Party in Wales, we had representation from Labour on the programme last week. Under Mark Drakeford, especially because obviously Vaughan Gething, who we'll come on to shortly, has only been, First Minister for a matter of months. But under Mark Drakeford, they were markedly different to, the Starmer view. I think the Senedd voted, many months ago about asking for a ceasefire. So how do you see that balance, from a Welsh perspective, playing out if we do get a Starmer Labour government in Westminster?
Well, it's a case of, is there clear red water between the governments of London and Cardiff? We'll be asking ourselves that question all over again. Back in the early 2000s, when Rhodri Morgan was leader of the Labour Party in Wales, he made a famous speech and said that there was clear red water between his government in Cardiff Bay and the Tony Blair government in London, meaning that the government in Wales was to the left and of a more sort of Welsh focused nature. There have been many discussions since then about how meaningful that clear red water was. Was it just a slightly tinged pink? Because actually when the crux issues came up between London and Cardiff, when there was a Labour government in both, Cardiff would often fold to what was going on in Westminster. That was my memory of things at the time anyway. So I don't see, especially with the new leadership that Labour have in the Senedd, massive differences between Cardiff Bay and London, and a new Labour government, a new Labour government, and Keir Starmer. I think they're very much risk averse. They play in a very safe game. And of course, the issues that are going to unfold in Wales over the next few years are going to be around serious cuts to public expenditure, another round of austerity, which is going to be a lot more drastic than the last lot of austerity. And then how is that going to play out in terms of the dynamic between Wales and Westminster, when Wales is still dependent on Westminster for the decision as to how much of a block grant Wales ends up getting for spending on the NHS. So I think there are potentially grounds for conflict, but previous experiences suggested that there won't be too much of a pushback in Wales, unfortunately. I recently sat on a commission that looked for 2 years at the constitutional settlement in Wales, and we found that the existing settlement is not fit for purpose. I would really hope that a Labour government coming in would look seriously at that report and take seriously the recommendations, because the Welsh government has supported all of those recommendations, albeit under their previous leader. We are in this strange situation in Wales where we're having our number of MPs cut by 20%. Yes, there's going to be an increase in Senedd representation, but our constitutional settlement isn't working. It's full of holes. There's lots of things that need to be done to strengthen and improve it. And the question that I've got at the top of my agenda is how much of that report will be implemented by a new incoming government, or will they just completely ignore it?
And I think, because obviously we've heard, with things like sort of devolving policing and judicial issues, and apparently there's pushback from Starmer, from there. It'll be interesting to see with the manifestos coming out next week where those will lie. But I think that sort of segues sort of nicely just into the final topic, which is the First Minister in Wales. So Vaughan Gething, last week, there was a vote of no confidence in him as First Minister, that he lost because two of his own members weren't able to attend to vote, even though they would have been able to do so remotely had they wished to. So there's a lot of noise around Vaughan Gething. There's a lot of disquiet around his performance, and the fact that he took £200,000 donation from somebody with convictions for environmental crimes. So Leanne, I'll just come back to you first then. So how do you think, is this going to have an impact, do you think, on the election result in Wales, but also how do you think it's going to play out with the Senedd elections in 2 years' time?
I think it's going to have less of an impact in this Westminster election, because most people have got bigger fish to fry, and the desperation to get the Tories out is palpable. And so I think that'll probably override most people's judgments on the First Minister in Wales. But 2026 Senedd elections is a completely different matter. And people are angry about what's happened. I think people are confused as well. They don't understand how somebody can lose a vote of no confidence and carry on in the role, and what that means for democracy and what that means for our Senedd. So I've had a number of conversations on the doorstep since all this news broke, and people are clearly very unhappy about it. So I think if nothing is done, and if the First Minister thinks he can remain in place for how long, we don't know, then I think the longer he's there, the more damage he's going to do to his party ahead of that election in 2026. And potentially that opens everything up for quite a very interesting election for us all.
So do you see him surviving? Because I think the issue with it being a general election as well is we know that Keir Starmer is very much in control of the Labour Party. He tells us occasionally that he has changed the Labour Party. What will that sort of noise that's coming out of Wales? Because obviously last week it was on, and we'll get to you now, Ruth, to find out how far it's gone, penetrated beyond Wales. But, hearing it on Radio 5 and Radio 4, that's going to be setting off alarm bells, surely, in sort of Labour HQ in London.
Well, you would have thought so, wouldn't you? And I'm of the view that if Keir Starmer wants Vaughan Gething gone, he'll be gone. That's the level of power that the leader of the Labour Party is able to wield. I don't think his position is sustainable. I mean, he may try to remain there for as long as he possibly can, but it's not tenable that he can carry on without the confidence of the Senedd. There's all kinds of, how is various pieces of legislation going to get through? How is the budget going to get through? If the Senedd members in the Labour Party don't want to accept the whip, or if members are regularly not attending or phoning in sick or whatever, that kind of situation is completely unsustainable. So I'm not sure how long that can go on for, but it certainly can't go on for 2 years until the next Senedd elections. I'm pretty sure about that.
And Ruth, from your perspective, what is the awareness from Scotland as to what's been going on in Cardiff Bay?
Well, I'm maybe not the best person to ask because I'm such a political nerd that I follow these things. And I'm always surprised when I go out in the street and I'm chatting to folk and I realise that they don't have a clue what's going on with Scottish politics, far less UK politics, far less Welsh politics, or, the further afield. But from my point of view, I just am watching it with the thick of it head on, thinking, what is going on? I mean, I really liked Mark Drakeford, as my nephews go, oh, Drakey, then watching Drakey doing the COVID inquiry, he came across as a man of intense scrupulousness and honour, is from a distance. I know that the Welsh Senedd has had its problems in terms of sort of legislation and effectiveness and how happy people are with some of the services, for example, the Welsh Health Service. But a lot of the time, I think people don't actually blame the right people, which obviously comes down to the fact that, if Wales was independent and you had the full powers of your country, then you'd be making a much better job of it because you'd have all your resources. We've got at least, we've got, we can use our offshore and our, because we've got different powers. So watching Vaughan Gethings, it's just like it's just like gangsterism's come to the Labour Party. And I look at Anna Sarwar, who's a Scottish Labour leader. And, he'll go, oh, yeah, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and this is what we're going to do for Scotland. And then his boss down in London clicks his fingers and suddenly the flippy floppy comes on. So there's no doubt in my mind that Keir Starmer actually doesn't care about the PR from the perspective of Labour in Scotland. He's just using, he just uses sort of Anna Sarwar as sort of like a convenient sort of glove puppet. And I suspect that Vaughan Gething, it's the same. To me, it's astonishing that this donation was allowed to be made and taken, because the Labour Party in London must have known about it. I mean, because they were offered the remainder, the dregs of the crumbs that were left, and refused it. So it kind of almost makes me wonder if perhaps Starmer saw Vaughan Gething as somebody who was so sort of ambitious in a sort of 1997 Blairite kind of a way that he might be sort of snapping at his heels, and he's kind of left the Trojan horse there to sort of self-immolate. I don't know, but it's just very, very odd watching it from Scotland to see. I mean, for all of the problems that we have in our Scottish Parliament, the whole Bain principle, which is that, even if legislation is really good, you won't support it because it's another party that's done it, which goes completely against the whole principle of proportional representation and the way that modern democracies are actually supposed to function. And again, if we got Scottish independence, we could actually get into being a mature democracy in that respect. It does make me wonder what's going on, because we do take seriously. I mean, Michael Matheson and his iPad, and was he watching the Celtic match? Was it his boys watching the Celtic match? I'm completely convinced that the guy didn't realise that he was going to be ringing up such a bill, and he wouldn't have known about it until it was brought to his attention well after the effect. But he should have resigned straight away when that happened. And Hamza Yusuf resigned immediately when it became clear, and you could say that there may be other politics going on behind it, but which saw John Swinney, who's a much more popular leader nationally, more better known and a sort of safe pair of hands seen as for a general election. So there may be other reasons why Hamza stood down. I don't know, but he made a mistake and went, here, I've made a mistake. The Greens are unhappy. The Butte principle, the Butte House agreement, I should have been more considerate of it. I'm going to resign, do the right thing. And everybody in Scotland, or lots of people in Scotland, went, wow, gosh, that's decent politics. How nice. This is who we want to be. And I look at Von Getting and go, God, that's just so grubby and unseemly, and what is going on? And the way that Labour behaved after the vote and saying, oh, well, it doesn't really count, I thought that was really, really dishonest. And it also makes me wonder if perhaps they're just trying to undermine the Senedd. If they think that they aren't going to do well in the next elections, is this them trying to undermine it? Because I know for a fact that the Tories have been trying to undermine the Scottish government, and we're seeing more and more, if you look at some of these select committees that are happening, there's more and more attempts at Westminster to undermine the devolved parliaments and the devolved governments. So it does make me wonder if this is part of a grubby plan.
Because I think this week we've seen the Conservatives saying they'll bring in legislation to reverse the 20-mile-an-hour legislation that was brought in by the Senedd. So they're clearly trying to sort of park their tanks on the lawn when it comes to it. But I think it's interesting, since we've got sort of representation from Scotland, and obviously sort of Leanne, with your experience of being sort of working day to day, the dynamic between sort of Labour and Plaid Cymru in Wales, where they have worked, they've been in coalition, they've had cooperation deals, and then the relationship between Labour and the SNP in Scotland, where it's very, very different. Why do you think that's so different in Wales, Leanne?
I think just the electoral necessities and realities, really. The SNP clearly has been very successful electorally, to the point where they've run a majority government and minority governments as well. And Plaid Cymru has only been in government as part of a coalition with Labour. Labour has dominated Welsh politics for more than 100 years. And the system in the Senedd and the way that Senedd members have been elected has enabled that situation to continue. You could argue it's an electoral system, it's fair, but it's not been proportional, and thankfully it will be in the future, notwithstanding some of the criticisms and problems that will come with the new system. But I think, in Scotland, this is why they've been able to be where they are with the question of independence, where they've been able to have the focus around the referendum in 2014 and the debate afterwards. We've not been in that position. We've not had the electoral success that enables us to deliver what's been delivered by the SNP on this front in Scotland. Let's hope that the new electoral system will shake things up a bit. Let's hope that other parties do get a look in following the next Senedd elections, because I just think that what we're seeing now, part of what we've been talking about today with the crisis around the First Minister, for example, is that we've had one party control for such a long time. and it isn't healthy. It isn't good for democracy. We also need greater turnouts in elections, of course, because one of the reasons that we get this stasis and not moving on at all is because turnouts are quite low. Now, I'm not somebody who's in favour of compulsory voting, but I do think a lot more can be done to engage people, to inform people, because let's face it, many people feel, and we found this as part of the Commission's work, that they don't have the information they need to make a fully informed decision, and so therefore they'll opt out. It's not apathy, it's feeling that they don't quite understand. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to engage people in elections, and I think the more people that participate, the greater chance we'll have of having a more diverse political outcomes.
I wanted to ask you actually.
That's one of the reasons why, you know, sort of Talking Wales is trying to do what it's doing. So, Ruth, I wanted
to ask Leanne, because I was pondering. I mean, once I knew that I was going to be coming on and onto the programme, for me, the one of the reasons why perhaps Wales has always been sort of voting Labour, it's sort of partly habit, but partly also perhaps because people couldn't quite see that there was clear water between Labour Party and perhaps understanding what Plaid could do for them. And what's very interesting to me is the way in which Labour shifted to the right in the 1990s, sort of the Blair years, and you know, were sort of not really making the changes that they could or should have. When the SNP's policies came into play, and they were clearly then, I mean, Labour, the SNP made a very deft move and occupied the left of centre very clearly with very strong policies that are about social justice and trying to make people's lives better. And also because it was grassroots and people sort of felt a connection with that. For me, what's interesting is do you think now, the question that kept coming to my head when the last few days has been, now that the Starmer is so to the right of centre, for a Labour Party, it's remarkable that so many far right of centre Tory MPs feel comfortable just stepping. They're not even doing that kind of mid journey of going via the Lib Dems anymore. Do you think that Plaid Cymru will be able to occupy that left of centre space in the public consciousness now that Labour has shifted so far to the right? Because if Labour is no longer delivering left of centre policies and they're just Tory light, where do people in Wales go to vote? I mean, is Plaid the natural choice?
Well, Plaid is a choice, and we have great opportunity and potential here, I think. But I think we started this programme by talking about Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, and there is support, significant support for the far right of politics as well. So this could go either way. That's how I see it now. Obviously, there's one way I particularly want to see it go in, and I think the more left we can present a case to people, the more chance we've got of succeeding in that. But there are grave dangers with the amount of money and support and media attention that's given to the far right parties. Then, you know, they could take up that space as well. I mean, I think the SNP have been inspirational in the way that they have positioned themselves politically, the programme that they've put together. It's not a socialist programme, and I'm a socialist, and I'm an eco-socialist, I suppose you could say. So there's so much further, of course, that they could have gone on the green front and in terms of social policies as well. But if you look at the UK as a whole, the direction of travel in Scotland is clearly to the left of politics elsewhere in the UK, especially England, but Wales as well. You know, we've had some good left policies in Wales, left of centre policies. In more recent times, they've been largely driven by a cooperation agreement between Plaid Cymru and Labour. Plaid Cymru seems to drag Labour to the left. But what will happen under a Starmer government and how that will impact on politics in Wales, that remains to be seen. But I'm not massively hopeful of a turn to socialism anytime soon.
I'm just aware that time is running out now, and Ruth, you're leaving us shortly with Broadcast Scotland at 12 o'clock. So if you want to tune in to watch Broadcast Scotland on YouTube, heartily recommend that to get a taste of what's going on in Scotland. So yeah, I'd just like to thank you both for your time, and hopefully we can see you back again before the general election and also post general election, because our plans are to launch a full service later in the year. And I've just realised that we're going to be up all night on election night. So again, if you're around, please pop in and join us while we broadcast live. And we will be partnering as well with Broadcast Scotland to get a taste of what's going on with the election results in Scotland as well. So thank you very much to Leanne Wood and Ruth Watson, and I look forward to seeing you joining us next Saturday. Diolch yn fawr iawn.